This is Dan Schneider on this Dan Schneider video interview. The book is The Testosterone Hypothesis. I will be speaking with its author, Roy Barzilai, in just a moment. My guest is Roy Barzilai. He has a book called The Testosterone Hypothesis that I usually like to do. I want to give my guests a few minutes to introduce themselves and their work. So, Roy, welcome. Could you give a little bit of background information about yourself and then why you decided to write the book and what it's about?
Hello. Okay. Hi. I as a financial analyst for like 15 years, and I was interested in the financial cycles, the forces that move our economic cycles, even our history and the political machinations. As you see, the world today is becoming more unstable. We are after a period of considerable growth since World War II, but I think the geopolitical situation is changing rapidly, actually in a negative direction. And I started studying more into philosophy, even neuroscience, and then I got into hormones, and I found out that I saw that hormones had a very significant impact on our lives, actually much more than we know. And there's some even the BBC made a documentary, The Secret How Hormones Secretly, Testosterone particularly secretly controls and regulates our social mood and our social interactions. So it's becoming considerably more. This impact is considerably more taken notice even in the academic circles now with neuroscience, social psychology. And so I became interested in those subjects, and I found out that I can contribute significantly by integrating neuroscience and the history of Western philosophy, which I studied in my first book called The Objective Bible. And I studied the evolution of Western philosophy. And I found there is a big hole there because what we're studying today in the academy, they're starting with Greek philosophy, Aristotle, Plato, but they're totally missing the Judeo-Christian contribution, particularly the Hebrew Bible, which is most significant to understanding Western philosophy, because you cannot understand the Western civilization without the Judeo-Christian civilization, and the Hebrew Bible is the core of these ideas, and they are totally missing from our academic environment. Then, when I made the research and I wrote my first book, The Objective Bible, I had the groundwork to understand how our philosophy morphed and changed and made our civilization. And then I looked for the neurological or psychological elements and how they contribute to our philosophy. This is a new field in science. It's called neurophilosophy. You integrate neuroscience like hormones, like testosterone, serotonin, how they control our mood, regulate our social interactions, and you combine that with philosophy, understand how these hormones shape our ideas. And what I did is quite revolutionary and groundbreaking. So I just published the Testosterone Hypothesis book in 2015, a year and a half ago, and it will take, I believe, many decades till this understanding gradually circle into the academy, because there's many other problems like cultural issues with feminism today and more socialism in the academic circles. So it's difficult to introduce these subjects so objective scientific investigation.
Well, your book covers decades and then also centuries, and you talk about rise and fall of hormonal, especially testosterone. Number one, does that not fall into a bit of a deterministic idea that human beings are just sort of slaves to their hormones? And two, how can you accurately go back a century or more and project what hormone, especially testosterone rates were?
Okay, yeah. Now, this very important question about the biological determinism versus free will. it's been problematic since the beginning of philosophy with Plato. How do you reconcile our rational mind, our free will, with our biology and the flux of the natural world? I mean, it's unstable, and we want our ideas to have some stability, something that we can believe in. So I agree with this problem. It's a big problem, and many people struggle with it. Just for an example, I studied philosophy of Ayn Rand, objectivism, and she believes in the blank slate hypothesis, which means we are have total free will, total rational, and are not in any way subjected to our hormones, our biological factors. And I don't agree with that, but I really like her philosophy. I believe in individualism, independent mind, rationalism. But we still have to reconcile it with biology. We cannot just say we separate the realm of the natural world from our philosophy and ideas. It doesn't work that way in reality. So I think the biggest challenge in both science and philosophy will be to reconcile this mind-body dualism, which Plato is the father of this idea in Western philosophy. And I think that's the big problem, and it might even endanger our entire civilization, because since the Enlightenment we have Descartes, French philosopher René Descartes. He was a Catholic, and he adopted the Platonic mind-body dualism. And this has been the basis of our entire philosophy since the scientific revolution, since the Enlightenment. That we still believe in this dualism, that we can believe anything we want about our mind. We have total free will, and our body and our hormonal factors, our biology, is independent of that. So it doesn't work that way in reality, and we have a big problem, because now our hormones are turning negative. We are experiencing a negative trend in social mood. We see rising polarization, conflict in society between the right and the left. The left is more feminine brain. You see that like in the last election cycle with Hillary Clinton representing the feminist side versus Donald Trump representing the masculine, more Republican side. And this conflict, I believe, can lead to the fall of Western civilization. It has happened before. Civilizations rise and fall like individual biological life. As the life cycle, we live and we die as individuals. And you see the same thing in civilization. You see the ancient Israelites rose and fell, the ancient Greeks fell, the Roman Empire fell. And since then we have the rise of the Christian European civilization, which been dominating the Western world and even the entire globe since the Enlightenment. But now we see this civilization in decline. So these cycles go through history, and what I suggest is that it's largely regulated and controlled by hormones, according to solar cycles. But we can begin talking about the hormones to understand how the biology works.
Well, let me just repeat then. But while I could understand that we might have in the last 50, even maybe the last 100 years, some idea of perhaps cultural hormonal rise in testosterone or decrease, say in some of the more advanced countries, worldwide, I mean, we're not going to know what the hormonal rates were in South America 40 years ago, much less 200 years ago. So how do you present or get this hypothesis if it's virtually impossible to go back 200 years, say, to, let's say, Latin America, Simon Bolivar or something, and, how can you trace hormones to, say, the rise of banana republics in South America or colonialism in Africa?
Well, actually, I have a good answer for that. I believe the same way you do with the DNA. How do we know to look back at our DNA? In genetics now we have great information. We can see the past, and scientists made amazing discoveries about our DNA 40,000 years ago, how we mixed with the Neanderthals and so forth. I believe we have the same database in our cultural evolution as we have in biological evolution. If we look at our history, we have 5,000 years of recorded history. We know Western philosophy. We know how the rise and fall of many civilizations, the Egyptians, the Israelites, how they influenced one each other, how they mixed, like you see the Roman Empire conquered ancient Israel and ancient Greece, and they were both acquired these cultures, and that together it's like sex between ideas. So you have the ideas of the Hebrew Bible and the ideas of Greek civilization, Greek philosophy, and were integrated into the Roman Catholic Church, and that gave rise to Christianity. So what I'm suggesting is that we have sexual intercourse like in biology that mixes the genes in the DNA between the parents producing the offspring. We have the same thing in civilization. If you study the history of Judeo-Christian civilization, you see that ancient Israel is like more like a patriarchy, the masculine brain. I'll explain about the Hebrew Bible, how it's a masculine philosophy. And if you take the Greek Platonic worldview, it's a more feminine philosophy, and I will explain that too. And then they were acquired both by the Roman Empire, unified into Christianity, and then you have the rise of Christianity. And if you see, you have like the God the Father is the God of the Hebrew Bible. You have the Greek Platonic philosophy, is a more feminine philosophy because it wants to unite everyone. If you read Plato, the Republic, his ideal is utopian communism. It's more like a compassionate. It's like what you have today with socialism, like we have to multiculturalism and communist utopia. So this is the Greek idea, whose father is Plato. And then you have these both schools of thought were united into Catholicism, and Jesus is considered the Son of God. So you have like the father from the Hebrew, ancient Israelites, the father figure. The mother figure, I say, is the Platonic worldview, and then the birth of Christianity with Jesus, the Son of God. Yes. And even if in Christianity you have the Holy Trinity, which is the Father, the Holy Spirit, which I think is more Platonic, is the all-encompassing God that unites humanity. And that's the beauty of Christianity, that it brought these ideas to all the world. So I can explain. It's pretty complex, but I can explain how it works.
Well, that people can read the book, and I'll link to your book and your website below this video for that. We don't want to do the whole book here in just an hour or so interview. But so let me just, because your book is titled The Testosterone Hypothesis, I would assume you use the word hypothesis rather than theory, because a scientific theory requires proof. For example, you could say in Plato's time A, B, and C happened. It was more feminine culture or something like that. But you can't actually go back and prove it. So that's why you're saying it's a hypothesis rather than a theory. You're only speculating, correct?
Yes. Well, I believe I since then I'm writing another book, but I believe I have most of my elements, like the dominoes, laid down. So I think I can prove it. But it's pretty early in this phase, so I'm still calling it a hypothesis.
Okay.
But if you see what's going on today, it's pretty obvious. I think that we are undergoing now a same transition as ancient Israel, because you see the United States was formed by English Puritans based on the view of the Hebrew Bible, and during this period, right now we are going through a fundamental transformation in the culture, as Obama has said in 2008, and he was actually correct. We are transforming. You see, the Western culture is now transforming for a more Judeo-Christian biblical perspective, who's headed by the English Puritans who founded the United States, the founding fathers. Yes. Now we are moving into a matriarchal, more feminine culture. So you see our culture is transitioning from a high testosterone masculine culture like 200 years ago, and during the era of the founding fathers. And I believe this will cause a split of civilization. The same like ancient Israel collapsed into two, the kingdom of Judea and the kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes. They split in 930 BC, like 3,000 years ago. So I feel very confident that it's going to happen in the United States. The United States is now, you see a split of the civilization. The polarization is becoming, I believe, too extreme to hold the country together. At some point, it will break apart. Well, you already see it beginning to happen.
Let me get back to a comment you made earlier. You talked about solar storms and solar cycles, and on page 151, You talk about one of the worst solar geomagnetic storms on the sun in 1859, and the publication of Darwin's On the Origin of Species. Now, that seems an awfully big leap to make from a geomagnetic storm to the publication of something Darwin had been working on for decades before. But would your hypothesis say then that things such as solar cycles affect hormones in humans?
Yeah, it's actually a lot of proof for that. You can read studies 2003 and more later. If we have the daily hormonal cycle where our testosterone rises in the morning, people have erection in the morning usually, and during the day it lowers, it declines. In the night it falls, and then you go to sleep. At 3 a.m. in the morning it starts rising till 9 a.m. Now, what's going on now? We have a collapse in solar radiation. NASA has talked about it in 2008. I believe it was one of the main causes of the financial crash and the depression, the Great Depression. Depression is a psychological phenomenon. It's caused by an hormonal imbalance. When we have happy chemicals like testosterone, dopamine, serotonin, the motivational hormone, the status hormones, people feel depressed, and they look to each other. They want to feel compassionate. They want to feel more together, like more empathy. So they become more collectivistic, socialist, and so they look for solutions, like in communism or fascism. The anti-individualistic ideologies, and that's what's happening now. You see in the world, like both Hillary and Trump are anti-capitalist. So what's going on? We see the fall of capitalism, the fall of individual liberty, society becoming more authoritarian, more collectivistic, because we are depressed. We are changing our social organization. I believe the social organization of society is primarily controlled by sex hormones, because sex hormones regulate the primary role of the male and female in society. So if you have a more masculine society, like the founding fathers, they're like liberty oriented, like you see it in the Constitution. And the more feminist society will be more communist oriented or more collectivist.
Well, let me just ask you. Let me just ask you this, though. I mean, if you went back 30 or 50 years to when the Soviet Union and Red China and there was the whole Warsaw Pact. I mean, at least in the West, we certainly have seen more individual liberty. The spring, the breakup of the Soviet Union, the fall of some other communist countries. Castro now finally dying, and hopefully in a few years Cuba will get rid of the other Castro brother, or he'll die off. Yes, we have ISIS and some Islamic fundamentalists that want to make theocracies, but we've also seen Arab Springs and whatnot. I mean, you don't see that the movement towards democracy. You see that a more movement towards collectivism. I mean, that, like I said, the breakup of the fall of communism and Arab Spring and all this stuff in the last 25 years would seem to indicate that we are getting more democratic as a global species.
Well, if you look at the Islamic nations in the 1950s, they were much more secular than today. There was no burqa in Egypt or in Afghanistan. Only in the 70s, the Iranian revolution started the crazy Islamic regimes coming on. What I believe is going on is we had testosterone rise in the 40s and the 50s. That was the age of capitalism in the 50s. Like you had Ayn Rand with the ideas of reason, capitalism, individualism. It also affects biology. They believed in individual selection in biology, reason. In economics, they believed in efficient market hypothesis. We look like more rational beings to ourselves when we have our happy chemicals up. And we feel good, so we like to feel ourselves independent and independent beings, and we want to be capitalist, we want to be creative, we want prosperity. But when these happy chemicals decline, and that's what I believe is happening since the 1960s. So in the 1960s, you had the feminist revolution, anti-capitalism, more socialism, the welfare state began to expand in the 1970s. They went off the gold standard, central banking expanded, and then after they started, there was a period, but these trends go up and down. Like in the 80s, there was a small reprieve, and like Reagan touches was some capitalism again, and that was caused the fall of the Soviet Union. Also after 17 cycles.
Well,
Those cycles.
let me just ask, and in case people don't know, you're speaking to me from Israel, correct?
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
in Tel
So
Aviv.
I now uh, have you ever lived in the U.S. In the United States?
Yes,
Now,
actually, I live in Miami and San
yeah.
Francisco.
Well, I mean, if you look at, for example, the two biggest social programs in the United States, Social Security for retirees and Medicare and also Medicaid for people, they seem to be some of the biggest successes that the American government has had. And when you look at, for example, the World Health Organization on the list of best healthcare systems, the United States, from what I saw, the last one I saw was 2014 or maybe it was 2015, ranked 37th. And virtually all of the healthcare systems around the world, the top 36 that were ahead of it, was socialized medicine, including Israel and including, unbelievably, Cuba. As poor as Cuba was, Cuba ranked as having a better healthcare system than the U.S. So, aren't you painting with a broad brush anything that's anti-capitalist? Because, as I said, if the U.S., the most powerful and rich state, presumably in world history, has 36 other countries providing better healthcare, that seems to be a powerful argument. And France is number one for like 4 years running, I believe. That would be a powerful argument that some things, some democratic social good does come. Don't you think?
Well, socialism works in the short term sometimes when you raise the deficits and you get all this debt, but now you have like 60, 70 trillion of unfunded liabilities. It's going to explode soon because the interest rates starting to rise now. The bond bubble will explode soon. The interest rates will rise. This will cause the collapse of the global financial markets. The global real estate markets will collapse. The debt bubble will collapse. The governments will go bankrupt, like we had in 2008. Was only a precursor of what's going to come because the debts only got bigger, and meanwhile interest rates were lower. But this is not a permanent phenomenon. Interest rates are starting to rise now. If you're watching over the last 6 months, I'm a financial analyst. And you're going to see the global debt bubble explode. The student debt bubble will explode. We're going to a financial chaos and anarchy. It's going to be much worse than 2008 because 2008, like I said before, that their interest rates declined, so that saved the bubble. But when the interest rates going to rise, like happened in the 1930s, during the Depression, there was a rise in interest rates. And I believe we're going to the same scenario. If you want, I can expand about it. I think Donald Trump is going to be like the next Herbert Hoover, and he's going to preside over the next global depression, the Great Depression. He's going to be the president of the Great Depression, starting next year.
Well,
so I don't believe it's a fantasy land. That's not a reality. It's going to evaporate.
Well, as I said, we only have, we're not going to do a 10-hour show. So, again, I will link to your book so people can read the explanations in more depth. We're just going over some of the highlights and your hypothesis in general. Let me talk about some of the other things that were mentioned that stuck out to me, excuse me, in the book. Well, let me start work sort of backwards. Am I correct in assuming that you think that hormone replacement therapy and that the use of hormones, do you think that's a positive thing, that we are gaining control over our biology, and that's a good thing?
Yes, that's very important. I think we had a lot of advancement in genetics. But I think up until 2000 with the genome program and all. But I think we are not looking enough into epigenetics. Epigenetics is about hormones, and now they cause our genes to switch on and off. And it's very important to understand this because our aging process is controlled by hormones. And when testosterone and growth hormones decline, and you have rising of stress hormones like cortisol, it causes your body to age, to self-destruct from within. We have a self-destructive mechanism, and this was, I believe, what's causing aging in humans, and I believe it's causing the aging of our civilization. You see our declining birth rates, our rising stress. Stress is going crazy. Depression rates are going crazy. Obesity epidemics. We are going more on drugs, even antidepressant, and even other all kinds of drugs. So I'm not optimistic. I'm sorry to say, but I believe if we understand how the system works, we as rational humans still can be in charge of our destiny, and that's what I'm trying to do. But unfortunately, the academic establishment is controlled by a different mindset for now. But I believe when the big depression next crash comes, it's actually going to be an opportunity, because when people are in stress, they're looking for solutions, what's going on, and maybe then we'll be more open-minded to hear something new. But for now, we are on a crash course, I believe.
Well, let me ask you about a couple of things, because you mentioned Ayn Rand, and in the book several times you mentioned how she was not a big fan of feminism or homosexuality. She thought they were negative traits in human beings, and um, just from a scientific point of view, I would say they are neither here nor there. What is your take on feminism, if the political concept, if not the sexual concept, and homosexuality? Do you think that because you do link the rise or the acceptance of homosexuality to hormones as well? So, and you would think I would think that in the last year or two, since homosexual marriage became legal in the United States, it's been legal in a number of other countries. I don't know about Israel. Do you think that that is a sign of a downward spike in testosterone? And would that open you up to charges of being anti-gay then?
Well, as a scientist and philosopher, I try to be objective, and I know it's difficult because we have the personal and subjective experience, and we like to be compassionate. And I personally don't care what anybody does with his own body and stuff, but we have to look at this scientifically, biologically. Biologically, we are sexually reproducing species, like all complex life, and well, that's what the feminist academic establishment does not want to acknowledge, that there is the transgender and homosexual culture are a product of testosterone collapse, because they, in their own research, I think the Wellington lab in the US and neuroscience lab, they showed that when you have lower testosterone, you are not sexually attracted to the opposite sex, but to the same sex. So there's much evidence that it's caused by testosterone collapse, but for ideological reasons, they will not admit it. Now, this is unfortunate, because it will cause the collapse of the civilization, I believe, because the old guard, the Judeo-Christian Bible believers, are now clashing with the new guard, the millennial generation, which hasn't gone well through puberty, because of testosterone collapse, influences the young generation more, because they should go through puberty during the age of the activation of the hormone circuits activate the brain from age 16 to 24, and you see this age group supports like the more communist, socialist leaning Bernie Sanders. Yes, so you see the same currents, like going like in if you see the homosexual culture in ancient Greece, that's what I think where we're heading, like Platonic communism. That's a homosexual culture, and the more independent, liberty-oriented culture was all the heterosexual founding fathers culture in the U.S. But the culture is changing, and we are evolving. To evolve is to change. So, like biological evolution, we have cultural evolution, and I believe both are triggered by hormone cycles.
Well, but how would, for example, an acceptance of homosexuality, which I think is what you're saying, that it's the acceptance of homosexuality that would cause the fall of civilization, not homosexuality itself, because homosexuals probably make up maybe 1%, maybe 2-3%. They're a small minority of the total human population of 7.4 billion or whatever it is right now. So how would accepting homosexuality, or that it basically just exists and that people could get married, how is that going to impact the fall of society? Are you talking economically a fall of society, ethics or morality, that there's going to be some kind of culture war over it, or what is the mechanism?
Yeah. The hormones affect much more than our sexual orientation. They affect our whole view of the world. You see it in philosophy. That's why it's important to integrate philosophy with hormones, and not today like the reductionist approach in the academy. They study hormones and and neuroscience and biology, and then philosophy, like they have nothing to do with each other, and that's not how it works, because our brain is part of our body, and our mind, our ideas, are influenced by our biology. So you cannot do science with this unbridgeable gap. So what I'm saying is, because the more the less testosterone we have in the culture, the less we have internal locus of control, the less independent we want to be. We want to be dependent, like on Big Brother, on big government. Even you see it in the reality shows, people are watching Big Brother. It's becoming a cultural phenomenon. So we have this push in us. Now, if you read like the biologist E.O. Wilson, he studied ants. Ants are eusocial animal, like us social animals. We work in large groups. That's what's special about ants and other social animals like humans. But ants are different because they are all females. The ants is a female society. The males don't do anything in the nest. The only job is once a year to fertilize the female, the queen, and then she lays all the eggs, and the entire nest works for the queen, actually. And that's the communist model of society. What happens, I believe, when testosterone collapses, you see the feminists want to castrate and eliminate the males. They're talking in toxic masculinity. Masculinity or male is evil. Everybody has to be a more compassionate, feminized. That's the new good. Yeah? If you're a male, if you're a male and you want to be individual, independent, like the male masculine characteristics, it's evil. So we're actually what we're doing. We're moving to a castrated, impotent society where people have to be feminized, and we have to serve a collectivist society like a queen. And if you see like this kind of societies, it's like called a eunuch or castrated, like you see in the Bible, Hebrew Bible. It's called saris, the eunuch. And these cultures usually work for the king, central authority. Like in ancient Egypt, in China, they used to serve the king, the eunuchs. They used to be castrated. So I believe that's where we're going, because it's like chemical castration. Even in Brave New World, the famous novel in 1931, he talked about that Aldous Huxley, about chemical castration. So that's chemical castration. We have low testosterone, but it's not like people are doing it intentionally. It's caused by hormonal cycles.
Well, let me turn to one other scientific theory or idea that you are not high on. You posit through the book that you don't think that global warming is really that big of an issue, and you point to some surveys that point to 1998 as one of the peak years and whatnot. And I know, and I'm not a scientist, but I know that when you look that online, a lot of people and a lot of scientists have said that that's cherry picking data, that 1998 was a particularly hot year, and then there's going to be a natural decline. But the overall trend, if you go back centuries, seems to match up pretty well with the rise of the Industrial Revolution, that in the last 200 or so years, to round it off, that there's an undeniable rise in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, weather, temperature rates. Are you being a Luddite in positing that, or how do you, and what does global warming have to do with hormones, do you think?
Well, hormone cycles are controlled by solar radiation, because we have the hypothalamus, the master hormone regulator in our brain, and our ancient mammalian brain, and it controls our hormone cycles through solar radiation. So what's going on since 2008 is that solar radiation has declined remarkably, and NASA, a lot of government agencies have reported on the declining of solar radiation. But what they're saying is that solar radiation has nothing to do with Earth temperatures, which is totally ludicrous and funny. I mean, it's crazy. But if you see what's going on, the reason that we have a transgender anti-testosterone culture, what I call it, is that we have rapid declines in solar radiation, and there's a lot of data. NASA published a lot of data about it. Now, they have the Aristotelian worldview, was that our solar system is constantly stable. The sun doesn't change. It's not changing, but that's not how it works. The sun is incredibly dynamic, and it's changing all the time. Now, if the solar radiation is falling rapidly, it's happening since the 1980s. And it was happening in the 1970s, and then you had also the feminist socialist revolution. It was in the 1930s, and then you have the communist and the Nazi socialist movement in Germany. So what I'm saying is history repeats phenomenal cycles, which are controlled by solar cycles. So in 1930s, we have data of declining solar output, and that affected history. That's what I'm saying. There was even some Russian scientists who were talking about it, but Stalin didn't like him. I have a problem saying his name, but if you want, I can send you later his name. He published in 1917, I think, about solar cycles, how they affect history. And the Stalinist regime didn't like him, so they sent him to the gulags, the labor camps in Soviet Russia. And it's the same today in the academic institutions, because if you say that testosterone collapse has anything to do hormones and the culture, the feminist culture, they say, "Oh, you're a bad, evil guy, you're against homosexuality." But this is a pure scientific. Even some of social psychologists talk about.
So right now, are we in a low cycle of solar radiation?
Yes, solar radiation is.
Now I'm not a scientist, but if we are getting less radiation, that would include heat. Wouldn't that mean that we would have that the global trends would be cooling and not warming?
Of course, but what's going on in the academic circles is you have to understand that science is not done by gods. It's not objective always. It's done by humans, and we are social animals, and we have our passions, urges. We have our ideologies, like socialist or whatever. Now, the ecological left, the feminist, they like to call the Mother Earth, they worship nature more, and they like to say that humans are evil for exploiting Mother Earth and nature. It's an ideology. I believe it's a pagan ideology caused by low testosterone, people becoming more feminized, and then you have compassion to Mother Earth, and you have to love nature and sacrifice for communist utopia. And that's what they're neglecting all the data about the solar radiation collapsing, and they say it doesn't matter because that's an ideological viewpoint. It doesn't have anything to do with science. But this has always been the case with humans.
So you would argue that temperatures are not rising or actually decreasing, but it's alarmism, and it's a political weapon being used that says that there's global warming.
Yeah, but it's more complex than that, because we as humans have evolved to think linearly. We think in straight. We project in a straight line because we've been hunter-gatherers when we were looking after animals to hunt. We looked at their trajectory where they're going in a straight line. So we don't think in cycles. And it was warming between 1977 and 1998. There was a global warming for 20 years, but it ended in 1998, 20 years ago. The global warming ended, and we're being on a plateau now, and then we're starting to decline with the temperatures. But we think linearly, so we started after a 20-year trend. We say, "Oh, it's warming." Actually, what global warming is a good thing. If you see, since the Enlightenment, the 1700s, 1600s, mid 1600s till today, the trend was global warming. The Industrial Revolution only started to affect that in the last decades, but it was caused by rising solar radiation. You can see it on the sunspot chart.
But even you had said in the book, you acknowledged that there was what was called the Little Ice Age in Europe, from I guess it was the 1400s to the 1700s, about 300 or 400 year period. But so if there's a little ice age, that would argue against the fact that it was warming, as you just said, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but it bottomed out in 1650, and it was pretty bad. In the 14th century, it caused the Black Plague, the global cooling, and the wars. You had the Mongol hordes conquered like half the Eurasia and bringing mass death, like Hitler was nothing compared to them. And you have the Black Plague killing almost third half of Europe in 3 years. So it's pretty bad when we have global cooling. We have to be really scared of global cooling, not global warming. It's really dangerous because we need energy to live.
Well, let me talk a bit because I'm going to, in the next couple of months, I'm actually going to probably do a show on what I call this, I think is nonsense of rape culture. I mean, certainly no one wants to minimize rape and whatnot, and certainly there have been many people over the years and women in many societies, even today, ISIS employs, rape as a, a, a weapon against females. But certainly, if you look in Western culture here in the U.S. and in Europe, ever since DNA tests have come along in the last 20 years, many men who were jailed for being raped have been released. So do you also think that when people cry things like rape culture, that's a sign of declining testosterone as well?
Well, I believe what's happening now is the Western culture is declining because the feminists are turning against Western men. The Western man was the global alpha male since the Enlightenment. I mean, he ruled the world. No, but now it's time as the alpha male is ending, and you see the Western. It's becoming a sin to be a white male. Today in the West, you have to admit your white male privilege. You are a bad person for being a male. So it's delegitimizes. That's the testosterone cycle because testosterone is a dominance hormone. Dominance traits are cyclical. I mean, you have your up and you have to prepare to be down after. So what happened is that the global alpha male is the Western male is now in collapse. What will replace him is the Islamic jihadist because this is a culture of submission. Islam means submission, and what formed the Western ascendance was the idea of man being a master over nature. You see that the Enlightenment ideas was the idea of man in command of nature, and that's the idea of capitalism, of individualism, that we can exploit nature for our own benefit. And that's what the feminists and the communists and the environmentalists are against. And they want to return to the primitive. The primitive is ISIS, is the Islamic jihad. They want to destroy the West and return to a culture of submission, like fascism and stuff like that. So I believe it's happening because of testosterone collapse, dominance. It's falling of Western men.
Well, let me ask you about Ayn Rand, since you mentioned her a few times, and you mentioned that you are an objectivist, even though you mentioned earlier that you disagree with some of her ideas about free will and being absolute free will. What is your perspective on Ayn Rand? Because a lot of people, and myself included, I'm not a big Ayn Rand fan. I certainly think she wasn't, her fiction I think is terrible, but just looking at her as a philosopher, a lot of people will point to the fact that in old age, after all of her talk about being against socialism, she eventually went on Medicare or Medicaid. I think one of the two here in the U.S. To deal with her ills. They'll talk about some of her own jealousies and righteous anger against some of her lovers. What is your take on Ayn Rand as a thinker and as a person, and is there a clash, a schism between the two?
Well, I like their ideas. I like independence, rationalism. So I love her philosophy. I told you I think she was mistaken, and actually there is a contradiction in the philosophy because she says man is rational, but he chooses. When he's not rational, he chooses to be not rational. But you cannot rationally choose to be irrational. You're either rational or irrational. So there's a contradiction there, and I think it's caused by an over-optimistic view of man because we are not totally rational. We are also moved by instincts, by passions, by hormones, and these things fluctuate. So we're not always rational, but this is the view in the 1950s when she got famous with the Atlas Shrugged, 1957. I believe it was the year of peak testosterone. And even if you look at the birth rate in the US, they peaked in 1957 with the baby boom. But that aside, so I like her philosophy. I believe it's a good view of man, and that's what we should look for. But unfortunately, that's not where we're going, because testosterone and the chemicals level are collapsed, and we're going into submission, culture of submission, anti-dominance. we want to be more enslaved, more collectivist. So
Okay.
I admire ideas, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, let me since the book mostly deals with the past and past trends as they've come to the present, let me have you project ahead to the future. One of the things that a lot of scientists, excuse me, especially people who work in computers and on artificial intelligence, someone like Ray Kurzweil, will point ahead, and the date keeps moving farther out, 10, 20, 30 years, at a point to something they call the singularity, where human beings will be surpassed in intellect by computers. Number one, do you have any truck with that kind of idea? Or do you see a merger of humans with machines? Because what you're talking about when you talk about hormone replacement is basically a kind of eugenics, which is scientific control of the human future or the human being. Do you see in the future some of these issues with how hormones affect history being less effective if if we do, for example, get artificial intelligence, or humans somehow merge with machines in the future?
Well, actually, I believe it's very, very possible, but it's not the problem because we already have a big brain and we have a lot of smart people, genius. But the problem is not with our intellect. The problem is with the hormones. They're in control. I mean, prominent American social psychologist Jonathan Haidt talks about this in his book The Righteous Mind. Also, the famous Enlightenment philosopher David Hume wrote, "Reason is a slave to the passions." We are enslaved to our hormones. Our intellect is not in charge. We are letting our hormones be in charge, and we are acting more like social animals, like ants. We are moving into a different kind of system, psychological, social system of bondage, of collectivism, like an ant colony. That's where we're going. And I don't think the people in high-tech, Silicon Valley understand that. They come from the academy, they're liberals, most of them are socialists and feminists. So they don't understand what's going on. They believe they're going to live forever, but it's not going to happen with testosterone collapse. They're going into a total collapse of the entire system. So I believe, I'm still positive because I believe these ideas which I present to you, and you are all the few intellectuals who's willing to listen right now, we're very few. But I believe as the crisis approaches, and it's going to approach very soon, they're already very stressed because of Donald Trump, but Donald Trump is, I believe, is nothing to what's going to happen soon in the global financial collapse. It's going to happen next year, maybe. So, but there is one good thing about it, because that's how nature creates. You need creative destruction. Schumpeter, the economist, talked about it. Creative destruction. So when you have destruction, it's a phase for a new phase of creation. The same like if you do weightlifting in the gym. When you train, your muscles actually are destroyed during the training. Only afterwards the growth hormone testosterone begins to rise, and then you need to rest, and your muscle builds up. So we need this phase of destruction to grow again. So I believe there is a place for optimism, because when we get the big crash and people are stressed out and they don't believe the system anymore, they're going to look for something new. And then maybe they will be more open to listen to my hormone theories and other such solutions. But right now they're living in fantasy land. They think everything is good. They have a lot of money with the high tech now, and the academic institutions make a lot of money from the student debt loans and all this financial leveraging. But when it's going to come crashing down, I believe there will be room for change.
Well, let's take a break here, and in the final segment, I'll give you a few closing remarks to wrap up your thoughts, and we'll do that in a moment. I have been speaking with Roy Barzilai. He has a book called The Testosterone Hypothesis. We've talked about its contents and his ideas. He has a website called testosteronecivilization.com. I will link below it, below this video to it, and you can find out more about him and his book, and also purchase it there as well. So let me just wrap up here as we've talked about the book. You mentioned that you are working on another book, did you, that you're going to expand your ideas that you present here. Tell me a little bit about this future book and the ideas that you're expanding on.
Yeah, okay. I think I call the book "Sex Wars: Gender, Race, and Religious Wars for Dominance and Submission" because I'm extending on my previous thesis, but things happening really rapidly right now, and what we're seeing is the culture war intensifying. I predicted that, but not as fast as it's happening. It's really scary. Now, what I believe we're seeing is a strange phenomenon because you're seeing the feminists and the socialists in the West, which are for gay and women rights, are actually siding with the Islamists with this multicultural jihad, I call it. So it's kind of strange if you look at it objectively, but if you understand that people are motivated by hormones, then you can make sense of that. So that's what I want to do, bring this perspective of the hormones into the culture debate. And what I found out in my research is that you have to look at this from dominance perspective, because testosterone is a dominance hormone. So when when testosterone is up, we want to be dominant. Our first thing we want to be dominant over is not each other but nature. That means what industry is about. Ayn Rand talked about it, that capitalists want to dominate nature, want to control nature, not each other. We want to give liberty to each other, but to control nature by industry, by science. That's the entire epic of the scientific revolution. But we have a problem. This motivation declines when we have the motivational hormones like testosterone and dopamine. Dopamine is a motivational hormone. Is declines. So what I believe is going on now, we're turning into a culture of submission. We want to be in bondage to each other, more collectivist, like the Bernie Sanders crowd, the millennial generation. That's the future generation, actually, is turning more to the collectivistic spectrum. And they're going together with the Islamists because, like you see, like in Europe, Merkel, she presents the socialist feminist side. She's inviting millions of Islamic jihadist radicals into Europe, and they're raping there. It's really they're doing a lot of terror. It's really terrible for the women. But they don't care. They don't. They're not interested in women's rights. What hormones are doing is actually multiculturalism actually interbreeding. Because if you look into our origins, now it came out in anthropology that Neanderthals were in Europe, and when the Homo sapiens came into Europe, they interbred with the Neanderthals. So I believe there are phases in evolution, like phase transitions, and you have interbreeding in the culture. Was that testosterone was high, the women were following the Western. They weren't interested in foreign men. Now the testosterone cycle is down. The women are against, the feminists are against, they hate the Western men, they want the Islamic, the other cultures. And these are the cultures of submission. So we have these cycles in history of culture, dominance and submission of humanity. And this is how we can go back to the Dark Ages, because Islam is a Dark Age religion. It's very, very violent. They want world domination like the Nazis. And I believe if the testosterone level continue to decline, we are in danger of losing most of the West to strength. But we have to try to resist it, but it's very difficult.
Do you have any optimism? Because you speak sort of downward about, or sort of negatively towards, in your tone about Clinton, and you said that Trump you think is going to be the next Herbert Hoover. So do you think, say, in 4 years, let's just talk about the U.S., do you think that there will be someone who comes along, maybe a third-party candidate that will change things? Or, I mean, long-term and short-term, are you optimistic for the human race or pessimistic?
Unfortunately, I'm very pessimistic because I believe we are designed to self-destruct. That's why we age and die. We have this design in our biology to die and self-destruct. We have all theology in Christianity about the afterlife, and so to try to deal with it, but it's difficult to accept that. Yes, but that's how civilizations are built as well. So our civilization is dying now. You see the collapsing birth rates, the marriage, this institutional foundations like the family, marriage is being destroyed. The capitalist economy is now not popular anymore. So So we are in a down cycle. But as I said, there is hope, because I believe when things get bad, some people will wake up. Not many, but some will wake up, and this will be the hope, I believe.
Well, the Testosterone Hypothesis is Roy Barzilai's book. TestosteroneCivilization.com is his website. I'll link to that below this video, and you can check out both of them. Roy, thank you for spending an hour or so talking about your work.
Thank you for having me. It's delighted to be with you.